There comes a moment when words no longer hold power, when explanations, apologies, and pleas dissolve into the noise of what has already been said too many times. That moment is where true understanding begins, not through speech, but through silence. Because silence is the language of those who have felt deeply, spoken sincerely, and realize that nothing they say will change the nature of what stands before them. Silence becomes the boundary that words failed to create. It is the quiet line between self-respect and self-destruction. When love reaches a point where it demands more than it gives, when it drains instead of nourishes, silence becomes the only honest response. It isn't revenge, it isn't punishment, it's clarity. To withdraw one's voice is to withdraw the power the other once had over your emotions. It's to understand that peace cannot be negotiated with someone who only listens to what benefits them. Silence in love is the moment the heart stops trying to convince, explain, or justify its worth. It's the moment it remembers that dignity speaks louder than devotion. And it's strange how people often confuse silence with indifference, when in truth it is the loudest form of emotional intelligence. Because the one who stays silent has already seen what the other refuses to acknowledge. They have already understood that sometimes, to save your soul, you must stop speaking to the walls that used to echo your voice back. Silence is the final form of communication that says everything without saying anything at all. It tells the other person that the conversation has ended, not because there's nothing left to say, but because there's nothing left to save. In the beginning, love makes us talk endlessly. We share dreams, fears, laughter, and vulnerability. But when love turns into a battlefield of misunderstandings, when words become weapons rather than bridges, silence becomes armor. It protects what's left of your peace. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop performing emotional labor for someone who sees your honesty as an inconvenience. You stop trying to prove that your intentions were pure. Because real strength lies not in being understood, but in being at peace even when you are not. And so silence is not withdrawal, it is the highest expression of control. It's when your mind tells your heart, enough. It's when you stop seeking validation from the same source that wounded you. When love begins to feel like begging for affection, silence becomes the only dignified response. You learn that attention obtained through pleading is not love, it's dependency disguised as devotion. And once you see that, you can no longer unsee it. You realize that love should not require you to diminish yourself to be noticed. You realize that sometimes people only hear your worth when your voice disappears. The silence that follows the end of a one-sided love is not emptiness, it's purification. It's the slow return to your own frequency after being tuned to someone else's chaos for too long. Silence allows you to hear yourself again. It's the sound of your spirit remembering its own rhythm, because love can become noise when it stops being mutual. It fills your thoughts with confusion, your days with questions, and your nights with overthinking. But when you choose silence, you choose to end the cycle. You stop dancing to a song that no longer plays for you. You stop participating in a conversation that has turned into an interrogation of your worth. You understand that sometimes love is not meant to be repaired. It's meant to be released. And silence is the door through which you leave without slamming it. It's the calm exit of someone who knows their presence was valuable, but no longer welcome. Silence is what maturity looks like when love fails, because the mature heart doesn't retaliate, doesn't explain endlessly, doesn't beg for closure. It accepts the silence between two people as the natural end of a chapter. Those who have truly loved know that silence after love is sacred. It's not emptiness, it's recovery. It's the invisible space where you gather back the pieces of yourself that love scattered. It's where you learn that sometimes love isn't a promise, it's a lesson. And silence is the exam that proves whether you've learned it. There's a hidden wisdom in holding your tongue when you want to scream. It's the recognition that the person who truly understood your silence never needed your explanations in the first place. And the one who demands endless explanations never intended to understand you at all. Silence protects you from wasting emotional energy on deaf ears. It's the quiet assertion that your feelings are valid even when unacknowledged. It's the refusal to turn your pain into performance, because love should never require an audience to feel real. When you go silent, you stop feeding the drama that thrives on reaction. You stop giving oxygen to what should have died long ago. That's the beauty and the terror of silence. It forces truth to surface. It reveals who reaches out and who disappears. It exposes who cared and who only wanted control. Silence tests the foundation of every bond. If it collapses without your constant reassurance, it was never love. It was attachment. The silence you keep today is the boundary that will protect you tomorrow. You learn to value peace over passion, calm over chaos, truth over temporary comfort. Because when you've been drained by love, the sound of your own stillness becomes intoxicating. You realize that peace isn't boring, it's healing, and that the one who truly loves you will not fear your silence. They will respect it. Because silence is not rejection, it's reflection. It's the space between what was and what could be. It's the pause that allows your heart to breathe before it speaks again. And when it does, it speaks differently, without desperation, without illusion, without need. Silence transforms you. It teaches you that love is not proven by how loud it is, but by how calm it feels. That respect is worth more than attention. That presence means nothing without peace. You stop mistaking emotional intensity for emotional depth. You stop confusing drama with connection. You begin to see that the people who truly love you don't drain you. They quiet you. They bring stillness to your storm. And so, when silence enters love, it's not always the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new kind of love, the one you have with yourself. Because the silence you once feared becomes the home you were always searching for. It's where you return to remember your worth, your strength, and your independence. Silence teaches you that not every connection is meant to be eternal. Some are meant to awaken you. Some are meant to teach you how to stay centered in your own power, even when someone walks away. And that's what silence gives you, the power to let go without hatred, to move on without chaos, to love without losing yourself. Sometimes silence is not the absence of communication, it's the mastery of it. Because those who understand silence know that love is not always about saying more, but about knowing when to stop. Silence is where dignity and strength intersect. It's where your emotions mature into wisdom. It's where love, once desperate, becomes divine. It's the point where you stop chasing peace and start embodying it. And that is why sometimes silence is the only answer love deserves, not because love failed, but because you finally understood that peace is worth more than being understood. The hardest part of walking away is not the distance, it's the quiet. The space where you used to hear their laughter, their voice, their explanations, now becomes filled with nothing but your own thoughts. That silence feels cruel at first, almost unbearable, because it forces you to sit with everything you avoided while trying to keep the love alive. Silence exposes you to yourself. It reveals how much of your identity had become wrapped around someone else's validation. And that's why most people fear silence. It doesn't lie. It doesn't comfort. It confronts. When you go silent after love, you face the echo of your own attachment. You begin to see that much of what you called love was often just fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being forgotten, fear of being unseen. But silence breaks those illusions one by one. It strips away the fantasy and leaves only truth. And truth, by its nature, is uncomfortable. You realize that what you were fighting for was not always love. It was the memory of who you were when love still felt safe. You were addicted to the reflection, not the reality. And silence destroys reflection. It shows you what remains when there is no one left to mirror your emotions. That is why silence feels like death to the emotional self. It kills the version of you that depended on noise to feel alive. But what dies in silence is not you. It's the illusion that you ever needed someone else to complete you. In the stillness, you begin to see your own power returning, slowly, quietly, like dawn after a long night. Because silence is not punishment, it's resurrection. It resurrects the self you abandoned in the pursuit of someone who never saw your worth. It reminds you that your value was never meant to be negotiated. You begin to understand that love built on constant reassurance is not love. It's insecurity in disguise. The one who truly loves you doesn't need convincing. They feel your presence even in your silence. They trust your quiet because they understand your depth. But those who panic when you go silent reveal something vital. They were never connected to you, only to the attention you gave them. They loved the feeling of being desired, not the reality of loving you. And that's the cruel truth silence uncovers. It separates the ones who loved your soul from those who fed on your energy. It exposes who valued you and who only valued access to you. That's why silence must be embraced, not feared, because it is the great filter. It reveals everything words tried to hide. When you stop explaining, you stop giving people new ways to manipulate your vulnerability. Silence disarms them. It takes away the stage on which their emotional games depend. Without reaction, their control collapses. And you see how fragile their power truly was. It only existed because you kept responding. Once you withdraw that response, you regain control. Silence is the art of psychological balance. It teaches you to detach without bitterness. It allows you to observe without reacting. It gives you space to feel without drowning. Silence transforms pain into perspective. The same absence that once hurt you becomes the proof that you've outgrown what no longer serves you. Because when you finally stop chasing what you deserve naturally, you start attracting it effortlessly. The shift is invisible to others, but monumental within you. You stop waiting for closure because you understand that closure is not something you receive, it's something you create. You close the chapter by refusing to reread it. And that is what silence is, the period at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. It's the decision that no longer requires justification. The silence of a healed heart is not cold, it's composed. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply exists in peace, untouched by chaos. And that peace is what begins to attract a different kind of energy, a different kind of love. Because silence refines your frequency. It teaches you that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. It doesn't need constant communication to feel secure. True love respects space because it is built on trust, not control. When you master silence, you stop begging for emotional crumbs. You stop trying to be understood by those incapable of depth. You stop lowering your vibration to meet someone in their confusion. Silence is your graduation from emotional immaturity. It's the moment you stop reacting to every signal of attention and start responding only to sincerity. You learn that love is not about possession, it's about resonance, and not every person you desire is meant to stay. Some people enter your life to awaken your strength, not to accompany your journey. Their departure, though painful, serves a purpose. It teaches you boundaries disguised as heartbreak, and silence is how that lesson crystallizes. Because when you stop speaking, your intuition starts explaining everything words could not. You begin to see patterns. You notice how often you were the one holding everything together. You recall the moments you silenced your own discomfort just to preserve harmony. Silence shows you the cost of your self-betrayal. And once you see that clearly, you can never return to who you were before. The same silence that once felt suffocating becomes your sanctuary. You start to crave it. You realize that peace is addictive once you've lived through emotional chaos. You become more selective, more discerning, more sovereign. You no longer confuse loneliness with solitude. Because solitude heals, loneliness harms. Solitude in silence gives you back your sovereignty. You start to enjoy your own company. You learn to listen to your thoughts without judgment. You start to feel at home within yourself. That is the silent transformation no one sees. While others wonder why you stopped talking, they fail to realize that you've entered a phase of inner power. You're not silent because you're weak. You're silent because you've outgrown noise. You're not avoiding confrontation. You're mastering control. Because true mastery is not about winning arguments, it's about knowing which arguments are beneath your energy. And love, when it becomes a battlefield of egos, is always beneath the energy of a peaceful soul. You learn that the most powerful response to emotional chaos is no response at all. Silence becomes your strategy, your armor, your protection. It's how you say, I no longer participate in what destroys my peace. And that is not detachment, it's wisdom. Because wisdom doesn't scream, it observes, it understands, it moves on quietly. Silence is where wisdom lives. It's the sound of self-respect echoing back to you. And when you've truly mastered it, you no longer fear losing people. You understand that those who cannot meet your silence are not meant to meet your soul. And that realization changes everything. because you stop fighting for love and start becoming love. You stop chasing peace and start embodying it. You stop talking about your worth and start living it. Silence is the sacred space where transformation happens unseen. It's where pain becomes power and endings become beginnings. It's the invisible bridge between heartbreak and healing. And once you cross it, you realize that you were never meant to explain yourself to those who never saw you. You were meant to rise in silence and let your peace speak for you. Because sometimes silence is not only the answer love deserves, it's the answer you deserve. There is a stage of healing that no one warns you about, the moment you stop needing to be heard. At first, you crave the chance to explain, to be understood, to make them see the truth you carried in your chest. You rehearse the words you would say if given the chance, as if perfect articulation could repair what was broken. But when silence settles in and you finally accept it, you realize that being understood is not the same as being valued. You begin to see that you spent more time proving your love than receiving it. And that realization is what makes silence powerful. It removes the illusion of reciprocity. You start to understand that if someone needed your silence to see your worth, they were never meant to keep your heart. Because love that only recognizes value in absence was never love. It was comfort dressed as affection. And yet silence exposes this truth in a way words never could. The absence of your voice becomes the mirror of their indifference. It reflects everything they refused to acknowledge when you were still speaking. Silence becomes justice, not revenge, not resentment, but balance. It restores equilibrium where emotion once ruled. It gives you back your center. And in that center, you discover that peace is not the reward for being understood. It is the reward for understanding yourself. Silence allows you to see the difference between emotional connection and emotional dependence. One frees you, the other drains you. When you fall in love, you merge energies, you give, you receive, you build. But when that balance disappears, silence becomes your only way to return to yourself. It's the moment your spirit whispers, "Stop explaining what your energy already made clear." Because explanation is for those who listen. Silence is for those who watch. Those who truly saw your heart never needed a speech to understand it. Those who didn't will never hear you no matter how much you speak. That's why silence is divine. It transcends logic. It teaches through presence, not persuasion. It allows reality to reveal itself. When you go silent, you give the other person the space to face their own reflection. Some people panic in that void because your silence exposes their emptiness. Others fade away quietly because they were never truly connected in the first place. Either way, silence becomes your filter. It separates truth from illusion. The ones who care will step closer. The ones who don't will vanish. You don't chase either. You simply observe. That is emotional mastery. When you no longer seek to control outcomes, only your reactions. You stop asking why did they leave and start asking why did I stay so long after it stopped feeling right. Silence helps you confront that question without judgment. It makes you see the subtle ways you ignored your own intuition. You remember the moments your soul whispered, "Something's wrong here," but your heart was too hopeful to listen. Silence amplifies that inner voice again. It reconnects you with your instincts. You begin to trust your own energy more than anyone's promises. You stop needing closure from others because you find it within yourself. That's the quiet revolution happening inside you. And that is what scares those who once controlled your emotions. Your silence means they no longer can. They can't trigger you, can't read you, can't reach you. Because silence builds walls words never could. It is emotional distance made sacred. It's how you say, "I've learned the lesson. I don't need the story anymore." And that lesson transforms everything. You start to see how noise was keeping you trapped. The endless conversations, the cycles of arguing, explaining, reconciling, it was all movement without progress. Silence breaks that cycle. It freezes the motion long enough for truth to surface. You realize that peace doesn't need participation. It needs protection. And sometimes protecting your peace means saying nothing. The human mind seeks closure through dialogue, but the soul finds it through stillness. Silence doesn't erase love. It refines it. It turns the raw emotion into wisdom. You stop hating them for not loving you right and start thanking them for showing you how much you deserved better. That is what silence does. It transforms pain into perspective. The heartbreak that once defined you becomes your teacher. You learn that love doesn't end when silence begins. It evolves. It turns inward, teaching you self-compassion. It teaches you to hold yourself gently in the places where others once held you carelessly. You learn that silence after love is not emptiness. It's integration. You are integrating lessons, realigning boundaries and remembering your value. And one day, when the noise of what happened fades, you realize that your silence has changed your vibration. You no longer crave validation, you crave alignment. You no longer chase intensity, you crave serenity. You no longer fear endings, you trust beginnings. Silence rewires your emotional DNA. It turns you from reactive to reflective, from desperate to discerning. You become aware of how much power you hold simply by withholding energy. You understand that every word, every gesture, every ounce of attention is a currency, and you will never spend it carelessly again. That awareness is your rebirth. And though it feels lonely at first, you soon discover that solitude is the price of self-mastery. But it's a price worth paying because in that solitude you find authenticity. You find the unfiltered version of yourself that doesn't need to perform love to be loved. Silence gives birth to that authenticity. It's not the absence of communication, it's the evolution of it. You start communicating differently, with intention, with boundaries, with awareness. You no longer talk to be heard, you speak to connect. You no longer explain, you express. You no longer seek love. You recognize it when it aligns with your peace. Silence sharpens your perception. You start hearing what people mean instead of what they say. You sense energy behind words. You detect dissonance before deception. That's the gift silence leaves behind. Clarity without confrontation. It allows you to move through the world with quiet confidence. People notice the difference. They can feel that something in you has changed. You're calmer, but stronger. Softer, but untouchable. That's the paradox silence creates. It makes you unreachable not by height but by depth. You've gone too deep into your own peace for shallow energy to touch you again, and that is when you realize silence is not a defense mechanism, it's your true frequency. You've simply returned home to yourself. The silence that once broke you now defines you. It becomes your standard, your strength, your serenity. And you finally understand. Sometimes silence is the only answer love deserves because anything less would betray how far you've come. There is a quiet kind of freedom that only arrives after you stop trying to fix what was never yours to heal. It's not loud or triumphant. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, like the moment after a storm when the air finally feels light again. That is the reward of silence. It comes not when you win, but when you stop needing to. Silence frees you from the exhausting theater of emotional justification. You no longer audition for love, no longer plead for clarity, no longer participate in the endless exchange of words that lead nowhere. You realize that understanding is not a prerequisite for peace. You don't need someone to agree with your truth for it to remain true. That realization feels like stepping outside of time. You see that every argument you could have had, every explanation you once rehearsed, now feels irrelevant. Because silence isn't about who's right or wrong, it's about who's done trying to prove anything. It's a graduation, not a retreat. That's the moment your self-respect finally outweighs your desire to be understood. And that's when you notice something extraordinary. Peace doesn't need validation. It exists independently of approval. That's why silence feels so powerful. It's unconditional. It doesn't seek to convince, it simply exists. In a world where people scream to be noticed, silence becomes rare, almost mystical. It unsettles those who thrive on control, because silence denies them what they crave most, reaction. Your silence is the invisible mirror they cannot escape. It reflects their intentions back to them without distortion. Those who loved you purely will feel peace in your silence. Those who didn't will feel guilt, because silence exposes. It reveals without accusation. It shows without effort. And that's why it's feared, because it cannot be debated. When you fall silent, you give others the opportunity to confront themselves. Most will not. They will project, justify, rewrite the narrative to avoid their own reflection. But a few will understand the truth of your silence. They will feel its weight, its sadness, its inevitability. And that's when they'll realize that silence is not absence, it's consequence. It's what happens when someone takes your presence for granted one too many times. You gave words, chances, forgiveness, softness, and silence is what remains when all of that has been spent. It is not cruelty. It's the natural end of depletion. It's what happens when love exhausts its vocabulary. Silence is the resting place of all that was unsaid, the cemetery of promises that were never kept. And yet, within that stillness, something profound begins to bloom. You start hearing yourself again. You remember what it feels like to breathe without waiting for a reply. You rediscover the rhythm of your own emotions, unfiltered by someone else's inconsistency. That's the quiet miracle of silence. It doesn't just remove others, it returns you to yourself. The more you embrace it, the more you realize how much of your life was spent trying to be heard instead of understood. You start choosing peace over participation. You stop defending your character and start protecting your energy. You become more selective with your responses, more deliberate with your presence. Silence matures you in ways pain never could, because pain demands reaction, but silence teaches restraint. Pain says scream, silence says observe. Pain pulls you outward, silence pulls you inward. And within that inward journey you find your real strength. You realize that emotional control is not about suppressing feeling. It's about channeling it wisely. It's about understanding that not every emotion deserves expression. Not every confrontation deserves engagement. Sometimes silence is the only language the soul can speak, when words would only dishonor the depth of what it feels. That's why silence feels heavy. It carries everything words can't hold. It contains grief, understanding, forgiveness, and strength all at once. It is the paradox of love. The more profound it was, the quieter its ending must be. Because the deeper the emotion, the less it needs to be explained. When you've truly loved someone, your silence after them is sacred. It's not coldness, it's reverence. You are honoring what once was without trying to recreate it. You're acknowledging the beauty and the loss without corrupting either through argument. That is emotional mastery, to love fully, to lose gracefully, to remain silent afterward. Silence becomes your closure, your confession, your cleansing. It's how you return the story to the universe without bitterness. You understand that some connections are not meant to end with words, because words would only cheapen what they once meant. So you let the silence speak for you. You let time translate your truth. Those who were meant to understand eventually will, and those who won't were never supposed to. That is the liberation silence brings. It releases you from the illusion that understanding equals peace. It doesn't. Sometimes understanding destroys peace, because it exposes truths the heart isn't ready for. Silence protects you from that overload. It allows acceptance to arrive naturally, without confrontation. You stop needing reasons, apologies, or explanations. You start trusting the flow of life again. You begin to see endings not as failures but as recalibrations. Silence reorients your compass. It points you back toward balance. The same silence that once felt like loss now feels like alignment. You realize you are not missing anything. You are reclaiming everything. The stillness that once scared you now feels like home. You stop waiting for messages that no longer come. You stop replaying memories that no longer serve. You stop bleeding energy into what no longer exists. That is the real gift of silence. It ends emotional hemorrhaging. It stabilizes the soul. You learn to live without closure because you've become it. You are the closure. Your composure is your statement. Your peace is your proof. You have nothing left to prove to anyone who once doubted you. Silence becomes your new form of communication, not to distance yourself from others, but to deepen your relationship with yourself. You learn to listen more than you speak, to observe more than you assume, to understand more than you react. Silence refines your emotional intelligence. It shows you that most of life's chaos comes not from events but from reactions. You stop being pulled into every emotional storm that passes by. You remain still, composed, anchored. And in that stillness, life begins to respond differently. People treat you with more respect. Opportunities unfold with less resistance. Energy flows more freely. Because silence is not only emotional, it's magnetic. It draws toward you what resonates with your calm. You become a mirror for others' chaos, and in your silence they see themselves clearly. Some will run from it. Others will be drawn to it, but you no longer chase either. You understand that power lies not in control, but in composure. That's the lesson silence teaches. Real love doesn't demand attention, it commands respect. And the one who can remain silent when the world expects reaction has already mastered both. Silence is not retreat, it's ascension. It's the moment your energy rises above explanation. It's where love transcends emotion and becomes understanding. It's where you stop trying to be loved and start becoming love itself, unconditional, self-sustaining, quiet, and free. In the end, silence is not the absence of love. It is the form love takes when it has learned enough. When the heart has said everything it could, when the soul has given everything it had, silence remains as the final truth. It is what's left when words have failed, when intentions have collided, and when emotions have burned themselves out in the attempt to be seen. Silence is what follows understanding, not ignorance but wisdom. It is the realization that love, as beautiful as it is, cannot always coexist with peace, that, to preserve one, you may have to release the other. And so, the silence that follows love is not cold, it's merciful. It's the grace of not turning endings into destruction. It's the kindness of not saying what doesn't need to be said. Because not every truth deserves a voice, and not every wound needs an audience. There is power in restraint, and silence is its purest form. It's the moment you realize that holding back can sometimes be more powerful than holding on. Love taught you emotion. Silence teaches you control. Love made you feel alive. Silence makes you feel whole. Love made you expand. Silence makes you return. It is the sacred balance between being and becoming. And once you've lived through both, you no longer seek completion in another person. You seek harmony within yourself. That's what silence gives you, the ability to exist without needing to be understood. You learn to find meaning in stillness, to communicate through presence, to express through absence. Because sometimes the most profound form of love is the one that doesn't demand attention. It simply exists quietly, like oxygen, invisible but essential. You stop measuring love by how loudly it speaks and start measuring it by how peacefully it stays. That's when you understand. Real love doesn't end when silence begins. It evolves into something deeper. It becomes compassion, forgiveness, and detachment all at once. It becomes the love that asks for nothing, not even recognition. It's the love that can watch someone walk away and still wish them peace. It's the love that knows the difference between connection and captivity. Because silence breaks every illusion we build around love. It reveals that what we often call heartbreak is just resistance to truth. The truth that not everyone we love is meant to stay. The truth that some people come to awaken us, not accompany us. The truth that closure is not something we receive, but something we decide. And silence is that decision. It's the choice to stop explaining, stop defending, stop waiting. It's the moment you reclaim your energy from the hands of uncertainty. The moment you understand that sometimes love's final act of devotion is to let go quietly. You don't need to make them understand your pain. You just need to understand your peace. You don't need to prove how much you cared. Your silence already does. You don't need to rewrite the ending. Your stillness is the punctuation. Because silence is not weakness, it's finality. It's the invisible boundary between who you were and who you are becoming. It's the soft closing of a door that no longer leads to growth. And behind that door, something begins to shift inside you. You start to love differently, not out of need but out of wholeness. You begin to speak less and mean more. You stop seeking intensity and start craving sincerity. You realize that peace is not found in noise, but in alignment. And when you reach that level of understanding, you become untouchable, not because you are distant, but because you are centered. People who once could shake you now can only observe you. Their words no longer reach the places they used to. Their silence no longer hurts you because you've made peace with your own. That is the quiet revolution silence brings. It ends emotional dependency. It turns longing into learning, loss into liberation. You start to see how silence changes everything it touches. It turns pain into poetry, endings into awakenings, absence into awareness. You no longer need to control what leaves because you trust that what's meant to stay will never need to be chased. You no longer crave validation because you finally recognize your own reflection in stillness. Silence has taught you what love could not, that peace is the highest form of connection, that the soul's greatest desire is not to be loved loudly, but to be understood deeply. And those who can't hear you in silence were never meant to know your depth. Silence is not the end of communication, it's the refinement of it. It's when your energy begins to speak louder than your emotions. It's when your absence becomes more powerful than your presence, because silence, in its purest form, is influence. It draws, it teaches, it transforms without effort. You no longer chase attention, you command it by existing in alignment. You no longer explain yourself, your calm explains you. You no longer seek closure, your peace declares it. That is the mastery silence gives to those who endure it. It's not an escape, it's evolution. It's how you move from reacting to responding, from needing to choosing, from feeling to understanding. You stop asking what went wrong and start asking what it taught you. And when you do, you realize that silence was never your punishment. It was your preparation. It prepared you to love without losing yourself, to give without disappearing, to feel without breaking. Silence redefines strength. It's not the ability to endure pain. It's the wisdom to avoid it when peace is at stake. It's not indifference, it's discernment. It's not running away, it's returning home, to yourself, to your values, to your center. The world teaches us to fight, to speak, to prove, but silence teaches us to transcend. And once you've tasted that transcendence, you can never go back to noise. You begin to see that silence was not the absence of love, it was the transformation of it. Because love that matures no longer shouts, it whispers, it no longer demands, it understands, it no longer clings, it releases. Silence is that love's final form. It's love purified by time, filtered through pain and refined into wisdom. It's the love that no longer needs to be seen to be real. And when you reach that understanding, you no longer suffer over endings, you bow to them. You no longer resent silence, you respect it. You no longer crave explanation, you are content with truth. Because silence, at its deepest level, is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of self. It's the voice of peace finally louder than the echoes of the past. And that's why sometimes silence is the only answer love deserves, not because love failed, but because you evolved beyond needing to speak. You've said enough. You've felt enough. You've learned enough. The rest is silence, and in that silence, you are finally free. Subscribe because real power doesn't shout. It whispers.